Hello to all the real progressives out there. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. We have a fantastic show for you. Whole bunch of stories that I want to get into today. A couple of them, even positive stories for once. And we're going to extensively talk about the March for Medicare for All on July 24th. Just want to, quickly encourage everybody to get involved with that if you have not yet already. You can follow them on Twitter at M4M4All. You can also go to their website at M4M4All. I'm sorry, not at, but M4M4All. I forget if that's .org or .com, but it's in the description box. So please get involved if you have not yet done so. There are going to be marches in 30 plus cities. I think we're even approaching 40 cities at this point. It started just in Seattle, LA, and DC. Those three cities, we will have RP presence on the ground, and we'll be getting some coverage from those cities, things like that. I'm going to go into the details a little bit later, but just wanted to start the show off by encouraging people to get involved if they have not yet gotten involved. And also really want to encourage you all to check out our other content if you haven't done so already. Last week, I was not live on Sunday because we did a marathon of The New Untouchables, which is an absolutely fantastic series. Really encourage everybody to check that out if you haven't yet. It really goes into detail about the extent of the corruption and rapacious behavior that exists in the banking world and in the finance world, and how that actually impacts everyday people and leaves a lot of people in financial ruin. Some really, really horrendous stories that we cover on that series. It's just really eye-opening and revelatory, and I urge everybody rather to check that out if you haven't already. We also do Macro and Cheese on Saturdays. It's a economic podcast about MMT. Cover all sorts of sort of separate important topics through an MMT lens. Fantastic podcast with our founder, Steve Grumbine. If you guys don't check out Macro and Cheese, please do so. We have the Up and Up. We have MMT Mondays. Just really want to encourage everybody to get involved with our content if you haven't. Go to realprogressives.org if you'd like to learn more about our organization or support us. And you can follow us at Real Progress US and at RP_in_action if you don't already. So to start this show off, I want to do a tribute to Mike Gravel. It has been a couple of weeks since he passed, but I was not live last week. He was a really incredible person, former senator from Alaska. He's most noted for reading the Pentagon Papers on the Senate floor and sort of bringing them to light, Daniel Ellsberg's revelations about how the Pentagon was handling Vietnam and how they were misrepresenting the war to the public. Gravel, just, in my view, a hero, and I'm very politically aligned with Gravel. His legacy will live on through the Gravel Institute, which was formed to combat PragerU and their sort of quick video online style of propaganda. So I want to show you guys a quick clip here. This is Mike Gravel in 2008 on the debate stage talking to Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, other establishment types. This was a really fantastic clip. If you haven't seen it yet, enjoy.
You're right, I made that statement, but that's before I had a chance to stand with them three times. It's like going into the Senate. You know, the first time you get there, you're all excited. My God, how did I ever get here? Then about 6 months later, you say, how the hell did the rest of them get here? And I got to tell you, after standing up with them, some of these people frighten me. They frighten me. When you have mainline candidates that turn around and say that there's nothing off the table with respect to Iran, that's code for using nukes, nuclear devices. I got to tell you, I'm President of the United States. There will be no preemptive wars with nuclear devices. To my mind, it's immoral, and it's been immoral for the last 50 years as part of American foreign policy.
Let's use a little moderator discretion here. Senator Gravel, that's a weighty charge. Who on this stage exactly tonight worries you so much?
Well, I would say the top-tier ones. The top-tier ones. They made statements. Oh, Joe, I'll include you too. You have a certain arrogance. You want to tell the Iraqis how to run their country. I got to tell you, we should just plain get out. Just plain get out. It's their country. They're asking us to leave, and we insist on staying there. And why not get out? What harm is it going to do? Oh, you hear the statement, well, my God, the soldiers will have died in vain. The entire deaths of Vietnam died in vain. And they're dying in vain right this very second. You know what's worse than a soldier dying in vain is more soldiers dying in vain. That's what's worse.
Absolutely brilliant clip there from Mike Gravel. I love how he just calls out the top brass, calls out Joe by name. You have a certain arrogance. Boy, has that ever played out over the last, 12 or 13 years since that debate. Just wonderful clip there from Mike Gravel. I'm also going to leave you guys today at the end of this stream with a longer clip. Democracy Now! Covered this, of Mike Gravel giving it. It's about a 10-minute clip or something, where he actually talks about how his revealing the Pentagon Papers came to be, and kind of talks through what actually occurred to make that happen. So I really want to pay respect to Mike Gravel. He was a hero, and who knows if we ever would have known what Daniel Ellsberg revealed about the Pentagon's conduct in Southeast Asia. So the next story today, this was a really remarkable, that's a poor word choice. This was a really crazy story, a stunning story. Haiti's president was assassinated, and the details of this are kind of muddy in the sense that there is a whole lot of corruption going on in Haiti, including the president and his opponents as well. So it's like hard to know. I don't think that the police chief who's been giving information on this is particularly credible here, considering all of the corruption going on in Haiti. But did want to show you guys an article here that I have in Vox. What the assassination of Haiti's president means for U.S. foreign policy, America and Haiti's complex relationship explained. The assassination of Haiti's president, Jovenel Moïse, has sent the country into shock and turmoil, sparking discussions in the international community on how to help bring stability. But Haiti's long history of foreign involvement can't be ignored, nor can the fact that often aid was provided whether or not Haiti itself benefited. On Wednesday, July 7th, President Moïse was shot 16 times when Haitian officials allege a group of professional killers stormed his home in a suburb near Port-au-Prince. Haiti's capital city. Prime Minister Claude Joseph assumed leadership and promptly declared a 2-week state of siege in the country in an attempt to control backlash. However, Joseph's authority is being questioned by some, as President Moïse had declared Ariel Henry the new prime minister only 2 days before his assassination. Henry was meant to be sworn in this past week. Complicating the issue is the fact that Haiti currently has 2 conflicting constitutions that give different instructions on what to do when the president is no longer in power. This is a really kind of crazy issue because Moïse had actually been in the process of changing the Constitution to his benefit. He also had apparently somehow overstayed his term. So there was a whole lot going on here. And I don't think Moïse was necessarily like a good president. It seems like he was pretty corrupt and self-interested. But his assassination just creates an even more unstable environment whereby actors who are also corrupt will sort of fill in that power vacuum. Okay, so this is just a remarkably complicated issue, and Haiti, of course, has a pretty rich history, both inspiring history and a sad history, in the sense that they are, to my knowledge, the only successful slave rebellion ever was in Haiti, and yet foreign involvement has kind of held them down. The Bush administration very famously, involved in Haitian affairs. It's one of those examples where the United States and other major colonizers and imperialist powers in the world have done their best to keep Haiti down, right? So there's this kind of inspirational history there where they had the successful rebellion, and then there's also a all too common sad history that we see in impoverished countries, whereby they are sort of left to, influenced by the international community into this state of instability and corruption and these kinds of things. But this assassination was wild. There was a video of the alleged assassins, 2 of whom, by the way, are apparently Americans, and the video was like them yelling DEA, saying it's the DEA, like as though it was a drug raid or something like that, which has raised questions about whether the cartels may have been involved. Apparently, DEA operations in Haiti are not all too uncommon. Apparently, it's not uncommon for them to hear like DEA in an American accent. So some people have speculated that professional assassins knew that and yelled that to try to make it appear as though it might be a drug raid. There's just so many balls up in the air, and I don't know what to believe or who to believe on this particular story, but it's very much worth covering. Very impactful, kind of stunning story here. Moise's wife was also badly injured in this attack. She is in a hospital in Florida. She is alive and apparently is stable. But it's just, this is a really, really crazy story. A couple of the alleged assassins were apparently killed by Haitian forces or police. And it just, everything about this is deeply complicated and unclear. And there don't seem to be any real authorities that are trustworthy in this particular case. So I don't know what to believe, but it's a crazy, unstable situation going on in Haiti. Another really important story here that does not get enough attention, and I include myself in that. I should cover this more, as should virtually every independent media outlet. Julian Assange. This is a case about press freedom. And what has been alleged against Julian Assange is effectively just that he did effective journalism. So the United States wanted to prosecute Assange, but couldn't on the grounds that they wanted to, which was effectively, you revealed secrets of the powerful. You can't do that. We want to prosecute you, right? But if you do that openly, you're very brazenly violating the Constitution, and you're very brazenly violating a dearly held principle in this country, which is freedom of the press, freedom of expression, okay? So what they did is they decided to prosecute him on the grounds that he somehow helped Chelsea Manning, hack into or illegally acquire information. Now, this in and of itself is effectively to criminalize journalism. This is something journalists do on a regular basis, help their sources figure out how to get information, okay? So if this is criminalized, and people at the New York Times who cover national security have come out and publicly said, if you're going to prosecute Assange for this, then I'm liable to be prosecuted for the work that I do for the New York Times. So the mainstream press has found themselves in a tricky spot here where their very profession, the principles that uphold their very profession are at stake, and yet they clearly have not covered this or taken a pro-Assange stance in any strong way whatsoever. So his alleged tangential, involvement in this is just the practice of journalism, and yet he's being prosecuted by the United States for this. So now this gets into some complicated technical stuff where he would have to be extradited. The United States now trying to effectively tell the courts that he would not be mistreated in prison, because the reason Assange was not extradited is because courts were concerned about the way that the United States treats prisoners in maximum security facilities. So the United States trying to basically assure the courts that they would not mistreat Assange, that he would not be held in California prisons unless other offenses were committed, that he would not be left in isolation unless other offenses were committed, etc. Trying to assure the courts oh, no, we're not barbaric. Of course we are. Our prison system's that awful. But it's gotten into these technicalities where the United States clearly has the goal of keeping him in jail as long as possible, wherever that happens to be. They've even offered to have him serve his sentence in Australia, which was a rather ridiculous development. And that's what this Guardian article is talking about. U.S. pledge that Julian Assange could serve any jail sentence in Australia is grossly misleading, partner says. In the event Assange is convicted, any transfer would need to be approved by the Australian government. U.S. government undertakings that Julian Assange could serve any prison sentence in Australia were grossly misleading, his fiancée has said, and a formula to keep Julian in prison effectively for the rest of his life. The U.S. government is attempting to extradite Assange from the UK and put him on trial in the U.S. for allegedly violating the Espionage Act by publishing classified information through WikiLeaks. He faces up to 175 years in prison if convicted. And I just want to note, you guys, the Espionage Act is in and of itself pretty brazenly unconstitutional because you do not have a right to defend yourself if you're charged with the Espionage Act. There are, like, many of the ways that you would defend yourself in court are disallowed. So you cannot say, I leaked that information for the public good. You cannot make that argument in court. It's not allowed. So you effectively are disallowed from defending yourself when you're charged with the Espionage Act. So there's a very good reason that people charged with the Espionage Act do not willfully come back to the United States to stand trial, because it's not really a trial. It's fugazi. It's theater. It's nonsense. It's not actually due process, right? So I just wanted to make sure that that was noted. Carrying on here. But the U.S. government lost its extradition application in January when Judge Vanessa Baratzer told Assange could not be Assange could not be extradited because of concerns over his mental health and risk of suicide in a U.S. prison. On Wednesday, the UK High Court allowed the U.S. government to appeal that decision on limited grounds. Stella Morris said the U.S. undertakings were not worth the paper they are written on because Assange already held the right to apply to serve any sentence in Australia. So the United States here just playing games to try to keep him locked up as long as possible because they do not like what he did for a profession, or does, really, hopefully can continue to do. One more article here on Assange. This is pertaining to the media coverage in Jacobin. The Julian Assange media blackout must end. Stunning revelations have emerged overseas about the reckless and duplicitous methods used by U.S. law enforcement against Julian Assange. But in the U.S., the story has been subject to an almost total media blackout. A couple weeks back, the U.S. government's attempt to prosecute Julian Assange for publishing classified material was dealt a major blow. You probably didn't even hear about it. 2 weeks ago, the Icelandic newspaper Stundin published a bombshell report revealing that Sigurdur Thordarson, I always butcher that name, a former WikiLeaks volunteer from Iceland whose testimony was key to the U.S. case against Assange, admitted to fabricating accusations against Assange. Those accusations had been featured in the U.S. indictment against the organization's founder, and they were cited by the British judge who narrowly ruled against Assange's extradition at the start of this year. So the fact that a major witness flipped on his testimony, and this guy, by the way, is like not a good dude. He's apparently like a pedophile and a criminal in his own right, yet he was used as a star witness by the United States government against Julian Assange. He has now redacted the claims that he made about Assange, and yet the media still has left this alone. So even, like I mentioned, his tangential involvement and how that shouldn't be criminalized anyway. But even if you, for sake of argument, think that Julian Assange should be prosecuted for what he did, a core piece of the evidence against him has been redacted, and the United States has not changed their position on this at all. And this is also a bipartisan thing. You guys, like Trump and Barr definitely upped the position on Assange, made it more aggressive. But this has been consistent from, like, Obama was the one that started the attacks on Julian Assange, the attempts to prosecute Julian Assange. Trump and Barr took it to another level. And now the Biden administration has not stepped back and said, no, we think they were wrong. They've continued to attempt to extradite and prosecute Julian Assange. And now, despite this redaction, they still continue to uphold Trump and Barr's position. It's absolutely egregious. This is a case that is at the heart of press freedom and should be getting a lot more attention than it is. Julian Assange is a hero who has been, we're criminalizing good journalism. He's been so unfairly smeared and attacked. If we tried to, like, imagine this being Bob Woodward after after the Pentagon Papers came out. Imagine if Bob Woodward was, or I'm sorry, after the Watergate revelations. Imagine if any of these journalists who have revealed important information in the past were to be treated how Julian Assange and WikiLeaks have been treated. I want to make sure to emphasize, and I'm sure most of you viewers know this, that Julian Assange is a journalist, not a leaker. So, like, even if you want to take a hardline position on leakers, like Chelsea Manning, like Daniel Ellsberg, the position on journalists is very much supposed to be different. If journalists get their hands on information, they are supposed to be able to publish it no matter what. And then we can talk about whether or not it was criminal to reveal the information in the first place from the leaker. But even if you take a hardline position on that, Julian Assange is a journalist. I cannot overemphasize the extent to which this is an important case and the extent to which Julian Assange has been wronged. Just an absolute hero, and he's been treated like a criminal. So this is an example of the United States really revealing their position on journalism and free expression. They don't really mean it. They like to, we sort of culturally pride ourselves on this, and the press likes to pretend that we have this robust free press, and they get all insulted and offended if you dare to insinuate that they act in ways that are more about access and more about towing the establishment lines and these kinds of things, which is really what they do. I mean, imagine if in any other profession, if the principles that uphold your ability to do your job were at stake, and you just basically turn the other way and then try to say, yeah, no, our profession is free and robust, and it's just ridiculous. It's utterly ridiculous. And I hope that independent media will continue to shine a light on this particular story. So at this point, you guys, I really would like to highlight the march coming up on the 24th. This Medicare for All is a policy desperately needed in this country, has been desperately needed for decades. Just to be really clear, Medicare for All is a compromise. What we actually need is a robust NHS. But Medicare for All would be a significant step forward and has caught some momentum. So I am very much in support of moving towards that policy. This march is going to be in tons of cities, as I mentioned earlier. And lots of fantastic speakers, lots of media personalities involved, all that kind of thing. So please, please, please go to their website, m4m4all.org. Again, that is in the description box. And here, actually, I'm just going to screen share and show you guys some of these cities. So Albuquerque, Atlanta, Austin, Bemidji, I've never even heard of that city, Boston, Bridgeport, Chicago, Columbus, Corvallis, Denver, Detroit, Fayetteville, Greensboro, Honolulu, Huntsville, Irvine, Kansas City, Las Vegas, Little Rock, Los Angeles, Louisville, Madison, Manchester, New Hampshire, Medford, Oregon, Milwaukee, Nashville, New York, Newark, Olympia, Omaha, Orlando, Phoenix, Pittsburgh, Portland, both Portlands, Maine and Oregon, Reno, Rochester, Salida, Colorado, another one I have not heard of, Salt Lake City, San Diego, San Francisco, Seattle, Silva, another city I have not heard of, Tampa, and Washington, D.C. If you are near any of these cities, please get involved, you guys. This is a very important event. We're going to be doing a long show that day where we're going to have volunteers in Seattle, in Los Angeles, and in Washington, D.C. We're going to be talking to people on the ground at those marches, talking to the RP members who are there. We're going to be covering some of the speeches that are seen in some of these cities. Marianne Williamson's going to be in D.C. Dr. Margaret Flowers is going to be in D.C. Tara Reid is going to be in L.A. Jimmy Dore, Ron Placone going to be in L.A. Kashama Sawant is going to be in Seattle. We have, there's a fantastic list of speakers, you guys. I'm going to be doing some pre-recorded content with physicians, economists, various experts in healthcare. We're going to try to touch on some of the less discussed elements of healthcare policy, things like racial discrepancies in healthcare, things like mental health care, dental, vision, reproductive health care, all these kinds of things that are sort of left out of the healthcare discussion in many instances. In the United States, we, for whatever reason, deem most of the things I just listed, vision, dental, mental, reproductive, they're all kind of cast aside as though they're not healthcare, not included in health plans. They're separate. They're right. Your eyes and your teeth are apparently not health. Your mind, your brain, apparently it's not health. So we're gonna cover healthcare very broadly. We're gonna talk about how healthcare is also not limited to healthcare policy. You improve the health of a nation with all sorts of socioeconomic policies. A jobs guarantee would improve the health of the nation. You know what I mean? Tuition-free college would improve the health of the nation. All sorts of policies would include an improvement in the overall health of our people. So we're going to have a great show for you guys that day. And I just want to urge everybody to get involved. It's really important to keep this particular topic front and center. It's m4m4all.org. And you can also follow them on Twitter at m4m4all. I am very excited about this march. I'm very excited about our coverage, and this has really caught fire, you guys. Like I said, it started as 3 cities, and then all of a sudden they were just popping up all over the place, right? So if you guys remember Sabby Sab, she was on my show here a few weeks ago. She's going to be the MC in Boston. Savage Joy is going to be the MC in Washington D.C. Sabby Sab's colleague at Fred Hampton Leftist, Rome, is going to be the MC in Detroit. We just have all sorts of fantastic, commentators, activists, experts that are going to be involved in this, and I just really want to encourage everybody to get involved. On a quick side note, I want to shout out Eric. Eric Kessner is one of our top people at Real Progressives. He was sending out packages to big commentators that included The Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kelton, and I just saw Tara Reid tweet yesterday that she was reading that book and thanked Eric for sending it. So just a huge shout out there, getting MMT information out there and keeping people involved in a very important policy discussion, of healthcare. And I just also want to note, it would be such a tragedy, and not that that's unique in the history of this country's political past, but it would be such a tragedy if we have 700 and some odd, and who knows if that number is going to keep on growing steadily, but 700 and some odd thousand deaths from a pandemic, and if to come out of that without a change to our healthcare policy would be such a tragedy. Coming out of the Great Depression, we at least learned a little bit. We embraced some Keynesian, like, hey, maybe we can spend a little bit without it being so bad. Like, maybe it would be helpful to have a jobs program. Maybe we need better infrastructure, right? Like, we learned a little tiny bit coming out of the Great Depression. Not that the New Deal was as progressive as I would like it to have been by any stretch, but we learned a tiny bit coming out of a crisis. Are we going to learn it all coming out of this pandemic? Are we going to learn it all? Are we going to learn anything on the economic side coming out of this pandemic? Or are we just going to go back to business as usual? We can't overstate like how many World War II's worth of deaths, of American deaths, has COVID been? How many 9/11s worth of people like have died because of this pandemic, and we're just going to learn absolutely nothing? I just want to make sure that that's front and center for people, and that we're keeping this in perspective. It would be an absolute tragedy if we were not able to get some change to the healthcare systems in this country out of this pandemic. And Joe Biden, to be clear, I think a public option is a poison pill, but Joe Biden did commit to a public option on the campaign trail. The Social Security Act would allow him to implement either Medicare for all or a public option by executive order. Because of the emergency that this pandemic has been, he has done absolutely nothing about it. So this is not a divisive policy, you guys. Medicare for all polls over 70% consistently. Half of Republicans support Medicare for all. In some polls, it's over half. This is not a divisive policy. This is actually a unifying policy across party lines, across class lines, etc. The only people who oppose this are the very most rich and powerful, and the establishment that is really serving big pharma and the insurance industry. So, I just cannot emphasize enough to get involved in this march, to keep Medicare for all front and center, and to keep this on the minds of those who make these decisions. This is a time where we need to push healthcare policy coming out of such a crisis as COVID was. So get involved at M4M for all, M4M4all.org. Get involved. Next story I wanted to talk about here, and it's kind of a nice pivot because this is also a existential, incredibly important issue. The climate crisis is clearly here, not just accelerating, but it's here, and it's been here for a little while, but we're really, really seeing it, you guys. I'm sure a number of you saw the floods in New York. I'm sure a number of you saw the record temperatures across California and across the Northwest. I'm in the Northwest. It was hotter than shit up here, you guys. Seattle set daily records 2 days in a row for the hottest it has ever been in Seattle. Portland, the same. Like, this is well beyond deniability. The climate crisis is here. I'm sure you guys saw the fire in the ocean. Okay, it's actually been a few of those where oil pipelines burst and then you have flames coming out of the freaking ocean. Just example after example. We had the biggest iceberg in the world break off of Antarctica just weeks ago, and climate scientists have been saying that the moment that happens, we have crossed a line that we cannot go back from. It's a methane issue that ends up, it's a greenhouse methane, right, which is even worse than CO2. So like it seems like every day or two we're getting some new story that is, you know, indicative that the climate crisis has arrived. And this Guardian article goes into how that is classist, just like basically everything in our society is classist. So the climate crisis will create two classes, those who can flee and those who cannot. Nearly 700 million people worldwide live in low coastal zones vulnerable to sea level rise and coastal storms. That number could reach 1 billion by 2050. A few years ago, after I gave a talk on water and climate change, I had an Arizona rancher come up to me and ask if there would be enough water in the future for their livestock, or if they should sell out and move north. This week, I received an email from a retiring doctor who, acknowledging both their privileged economic situation and the personal nature of the decision, nevertheless asked if it would be more advantageous or safe to consider moving to coastal Oregon or Washington rather than staying in Southern California because of rising seas, extreme heat, and the growing threat of wildfires. At an Independence Day party this weekend, a couple asked me if they should move from Colorado to Michigan because of growing drought and water shortages in the Western U.S. I get these questions regularly and am both encouraged and dismayed by them. Encouraged because it suggests that the message about climate risks is finally getting out and people are beginning to reflect on the personal implications of those risks. Dismayed by the realization that the climate crisis is going to produce two classes of refugees. Those with the freedom and financial resources to try, for a while at least, to flee from growing threats in advance, and those who will be left behind to suffer the consequences in the form of illness, death, and destruction. And I can't answer them. Decisions about where to live, when we're lucky enough to have the ability to choose, are deeply personal, a function of family, friends, jobs, wealth, and idiosyncratic preferences about community, health, environment, and yes, climate and weather. But from the point of view of a scientist, certain facts about our changing environment are now glaringly unambiguous. Sea levels are rising and risks from coastal flooding and storms, already extremely high in some places, are growing fast. Rising temperatures are already causing more extreme heat events, which have always been lethal and are becoming more so. Wildfires are increasing in frequency, intensity, and duration in many parts of the world, threatening communities with death and destruction and causing severe air pollution for millions. The severity of both droughts and floods are on the rise in some regions, and with consequences for water availability and quality and public health. So, as with most things in our society, when something like this goes wrong, I apologize. I meant to have that up on the screen as I was reading it, but that was an article in The Guardian I was reading from. As with most things in our society, there is a class that can escape the harm that we are sort of reaping on ourselves, right? There's the class who can run away from it, and there's the class that cannot. So the impoverished will be stuck to deal with this stuff. I'm sure a number of you remember the infamous Ben Shapiro clip where he made a total ass out of himself saying of climate change that when houses go underwater in Florida, that the owners of those houses should just sell. And there was the famous clip of the guy bursting through the wall and he says, "To who, Ben? Aquaman?" Right? Fantastic. Ben making a total ass of himself. Let him talk because he'll just keep doing that. But anyway, the point is, if you actually look at that scenario logically, the people who will be stuck in that area are the impoverished people, the people who cannot afford to move. So you're gonna end up with all of these various forms of very intense crisis, right? Like direct human needs, right? Like water, like land, like a climate that is survivable. And those needs will only be met for those who can afford to meet them. So the combination of the climate crisis and our unwillingness to set up an economy that's actually somewhat equitable and somewhat fair, the combination of those two things is just going to be catastrophic for the billion or two people or whatever at the bottom of the world's economic standing. So the most impoverished are going to get royally fucked by this, and you know, and then the rest of us. So meanwhile, what do you have? You have the most powerful people in the world, the most rich people in the world, having a space race with each other, right? Having a dick measuring contest to see who can get into space fastest. That's their response. Not like, let's address this so that billions of human beings don't suffer. Not let's use our wealth to address the problem. Instead, they continue contributing to the problem with their massive businesses. No, we're gonna sit here and see who can get to space the fastest, so that we can escape it. You know, just insane. And just to be clear, I saw a great thread on Twitter about this. I wish I would have loaded this up to show you guys, but for anyone that has concerns that the Bezoses and Musks of the world can actually go have some sort of enjoyable life up in space while the rest of us burn down here, we're just not anywhere near there technologically. When you're in space, it's not fun. Like, astronauts don't enjoy being on the International Space Station. It's a whole lot of hard work to keep that thing working and to make sure that everybody on it stays alive. So thousands of people on the ground and the astronauts that are there constantly in communication and working on things, fixing things, doing spacewalks to fix things on the outside, and et cetera, et cetera. So anyone who thinks Bezos or Musk is going to go like have a grand time on some space station, we're just not technologically there. But the point is that that's their instinctive, response to an impending crisis. How can we escape it? Not how can we halt it or actually work on making it more like sustainable or what's the word I'm looking for? Like making it so that the billions of people left on Earth can deal with the situation, manage the situation, survive the situation. Instead of that, their first thought is, how can I escape it? Fuck all of the rest of them. How can I escape it? Right? That's what's led to the crisis, and now that's their response to the crisis. So we are very much here, you guys. It has arrived. We're seeing massive, versions of extreme weather, storms, hot, cold, records being set all the time, massive icebergs breaking off and melting. Like the climate crisis is here. It's a matter of, are we going to deal with it in any way, shape, or form, or are we going to prioritize capitalism and profits above a sustainable environment for human beings to live in? It's existential issue, cannot be overstated. Just like the Medicare for All issue. On a kind of a light note here, I covered that India Walton is an open socialist. She won the mayoral seat in Buffalo, or I should say she won the Democratic primary. And in Buffalo, that means you're going to be mayor. Byron Brown, who was the 4-term mayor preceding her, who she defeated in that primary, has vowed to do a write-in campaign. Byron Brown, very establishment type dude. He was endorsed by Cuomo, apparently very close to Andrew Cuomo. And he has now said he's going to do a write-in campaign to run against both India Walton and the Republican. Now, I just want to note, if a progressive dared to do that, imagine if Bernie did a write-in campaign against Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden. Seriously, just imagine. Imagine if one of the progressive congressional candidates who lost a primary decided to do a write-in campaign. I mean, I can already see the headlines in the Washington Post and the clips on CNN. Oh, they're going to ruin it for the Democrats. They're going to hand the seat to Republicans. Oh, the humanity, right? We can all see that happening. Do you think that Byron Brown is going to be subjected to that same thing? Do you think Byron Brown is going to be called a sore loser in the way that Bernie would have been? Of course not, because it's a massive double standard. Massive double standard. When progressives primary a sitting establishment member of Congress, there is a visceral response to that. How dare you attack the party like this, right? You're providing ammo to the Republicans, et cetera, et cetera. And yet, when the DNC endorses or helps establishment candidates try to primary a progressive like AOC's primary opponent or Rashida Tlaib's primary opponent, well, then it's all fine and good. Then it's not you're attacking the party. Then it's not you're helping Republicans. Then it's fine and good. So this is a massive double standard, and Byron Brown will get to float comfortably while he potentially hands this mayor's seat to the Republicans. I hope that won't be the case. I hope that India is able to win regardless. But this is such a petty, petulant move from Byron Brown. Shame on him. You lost. Go the fuck home. That's all there is to it. We'll see how this plays out, but I thought it was rather, fitting that this is how Byron Brown responded. I also, it reminds me quite a bit of that story in Nevada where the state party was taken over by leftists. All the leadership positions swept by DSA members and progressives. And then all of the establishment members who previously made up that leadership team literally just quit. They took their ball and they went home. And before they did that, they cleaned out the coffers of the party's money. They spent all that money on establishment. I believe it was a Senate candidate in Nevada who was very down the line and moderate. They spent all that money on her. So it just, when the establishment loses, they pout, they take their ball and go home. They act petty and petulant. When progressives lose, then they tell us that we're sore losers, right? And that we're helping Republicans by attacking the establishment. It's such a massive double standard, and it needs to be called out. I'm very much hoping that India Walton will be successful in winning that mayor seat in Buffalo. She rightfully won the primary, and I hope Byron Brown will change his mind on this, but I doubt he will because he's committed to it. I have a local article here. Write down Byron Brown is the term he's using, 4-term Buffalo mayor to seek write-in campaign in November election. So just, kind of funny and also kind of sad. I hope it's unsuccessful. I hope that India is able to pull that seat out despite Byron Brown's best efforts otherwise. We have another really crazy story here, you guys. This is just a really crazy story day, I suppose. I'm sure a number of you have seen that massive building collapse in Florida that has killed a whole bunch of people. This is in the Associated Press. Search in Florida collapsed to take weeks. Deaths reach 90. Authorities searching for victims of a deadly collapse in Florida said Sunday they hope to conclude their painstaking work in the coming weeks as a team of first responders from Israel departed the site. Miami-Dade County Mayor Daniela Levine Cava said 90 deaths have now been confirmed in last month's collapse of the 12-story Chaplin Towers South in Surfside, up from 86 a day before. Among them are 71 bodies that have been identified and their families have been notified. She said some 31 people remain listed as missing. Miami-Dade Police Department said 3 young children were among those recently identified. Crews continued to search the remaining pile of rubble, peeling layer after layer of debris in search of bodies. The unrelenting search has resulted in the recovery of over 14 million pounds of concrete and debris. This is a tragic story, but it's also not a one-off. It would be tragic enough if it was a one-off and worthy of coverage, even if it was a one-off. But the problem is that it's likely that there are dozens of, if not hundreds, of buildings in Florida that have been built with lax regulation or with certain regulations being violated. And this is similar to, I'm blanking on the name of the building now, but there was a famous collapse in the UK, an apartment building. And I'm sorry, not collapse, it was a fire. And they figured out that the way it was built, they skirted certain regulations about fire safety. And this is becoming a pattern whereby these kinds of regulations are not abided by and they lead to massive death. And, this is terribly, terribly sad, but it's also an indication of where we need to be focused, which is, where Real Progressives tries to be focused, and that is on the institutional corruption and the deep-seated problems that lead to all of these kinds of issues and stories and tragedies. So, again, just want to plug the new Untouchables, you guys. That's the kind of corruption being talked about there is kind of mirrored in stories like this, where a profit incentive, a rapacious incentive, and often corruption lead to horrendous results for everyday people, including death or major injury or losing a loved one, right? Or in the UK's case, losing your home, or all these kinds of just devastating things to people's personal lives. And it very much seems like there's a systemic issue in Florida as it pertains to building regulations, and I don't think that is unique to Florida. So we'll keep our eye on these kinds of stories going forward, and continue covering that underlying corruption and those underlying roots to these kinds of problems. It's just terribly tragic. I'm sorry to be such a downer today, you guys. I don't seem to have I have, a couple of decent stories coming up later, but really interesting story here. Tucker Carlson saying that the NSA is spying on him. Just to be really clear, I don't trust Tucker as far as I can throw him. He's a bad faith actor, and he'll use this to garner attention, just like he'll use any story or any happening to garner attention and to try to sort of fuel the flames of division and then profit off of that. Tucker Carlson is horrendous. The reason I'm very interested in this story is because the NSA also very much does spy on Americans, and I don't think this is like something specific to Tucker. The liberal media responded to this, of course, viscerally. Anytime Tucker says anything, they have to come out and say, well, he's lying. It's obviously not true, blah, blah, blah. But like, to defend the NSA's practices is just as egregious as to take Tucker at his word. The NSA spies on Americans all the time. And their response to this, by the way, it's very rare for the NSA to respond to something like this, but they actually did respond to Tucker's claim. And they said effectively that they denied it, but they used a very specific term. They said, Tucker is not the target of any investigation. But we know from leaks mostly that the NSA often is collecting information on people who are not targets, including Americans who are not targets. So it's entirely likely that Tucker and millions of other Americans have data being collected by the NSA. What happened in Tucker's case, he legally should be identified as journalist 1 or journalist 2 or whatever. He should not be named in the NSA's internal documents about this stuff, because they're not supposed to know who it is that they're investigating for X, Y, or Z, or who it is they're collecting information on for X, Y, or Z in this kind of case. That was apparently leaked somehow, that it was Tucker. And so this all became public, and Tucker somehow had a source that informed him he was being investigated. Now, again, I just want to be clear. Don't trust Tucker Carlson as far as you can throw him. No idea if what he's saying is true or not, but we have a piece in Axios here from Jonathan Swan. Scoop, Tucker Carlson sought Putin interview at time of spying claim. Tucker Carlson was talking to U.S.-based Kremlin intermediaries about setting up an interview with Vladimir Putin shortly before the Fox News host accused the National Security Agency of spying on him. Sources familiar with the conversations tell Axios. So it's likely that was the start of all of this, right? And if that's the case, that's also problematic, because interviewing a world leader should not, that shouldn't start an investigation. That shouldn't trigger an investigation. Interviewing a world leader, even one who Vladimir Putin's awful. He's horrendous. A lot of world leaders are awful and horrendous. But interviewing them is very important, and having some form of transparency as to what they're thinking and what their actions are is important. I don't want Tucker necessarily interviewing anybody, let alone world leaders. He's dangerous. He knows how to frame right-wing talking points as though they're populist. But in general, the press interviewing world leaders should not trigger investigations and should be applauded, not condemned. Okay. So I'm fascinated by this story, less as it pertains to Tucker and more as it pertains to the NSA's practices in general and how they are treating journalists and citizens in the United States and how much data is being collected on all of us. This, to tie it back to talking about Assange, this is why WikiLeaks and other journalists like those at WikiLeaks are so fucking important, you guys. We have to know what the intelligence community is doing on these kinds of issues. We have to know how much data is being collected and in what ways they're brazenly violating the Constitution and our rights, right? Much as I hate Tucker Carlson, he does like have a right not to be investigated by, you know what I'm saying? Like he has constitutional rights, just like you and I do. So this was a really weird story. Tucker obviously is going to play this however it most benefits him, for attention, for money, etc. But it is very much worth discussing the NSA's practices and how they might be violating our rights. And the liberal media's instinctive, visceral response to this, to just oppose anything that Tucker Carlson says without being remotely critical of the NSA or the intelligence institutions, is problematic. And I think this should be covered more by independent sources. And just like Assange, you know, these kinds of things just don't get traction in the mainstream media in any way, shape, or form. And when they do, they're framed in a very particular way. So we need to have a better idea what kind of conduct our intelligence community is engaging in on a regular basis. And even if it is somebody that we very much dislike who is being victimized by their practices, we need to stand up and say something. So a story here about corruption. Nancy Pelosi is one of the most wealthy members of Congress. She's also one of the most powerful, obviously. Speaker of the House is right up there, right? The Senate leaders and the Speaker and the Minority Leader are all kind of, there's like a handful of people who have the most power in Congress. Pelosi's right there, probably number 1 or 2. So she has inside information in a way that almost nobody does. Yet she is still trading millions and millions of dollars regularly. And her husband's a big Wall Street goon, so they're very involved in this kind of stuff, despite the fact that Pelosi very clearly has an inside track on information about bills that are coming up and which industries are going to benefit, which businesses are going to benefit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They continue to engage in this brazen appearance of corruption. Regardless, this is in Business Insider. Nancy Pelosi's husband just invested millions in 4 mega cap tech stocks, including Apple and Amazon. Paul Pelosi, investment manager and the husband of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, purchased up to $11 million worth of mega cap tech stocks in May and June, according to a financial disclosure form filed last week. Pelosi's biggest purchase was $4.8 million worth of Alphabet shares on June 18th, according to the disclosure. Pelosi exercised 40 call options to buy 4,000 shares at a strike price of $1,200, with shares of Alphabet currently trading at $2,524. That stock position is now worth more than $10 million, representing an unrealized gain of more than $5 million. On May 21st, Pelosi purchased up to $1 million worth of call options in Amazon, along with up to $250,000 in call options on Apple. According to the disclosure form, Pelosi purchased 20 Amazon call options with a strike price of $3,000 and an expiration date of June 17th, 2022, along with 50 Apple call options with a strike price of $100 and an expiration date of June 17th, 2022. So massive investments being made here by the Pelosis. And the Amazon one really catches my eye because Amazon is now, so Microsoft was granted a contract by the federal government. Amazon complained, and now that contract is back up for both companies to bid for and fight for, and it's likely that they're going to somehow split it. So that's going to be billions of dollars in profit for Amazon, right as Pelosi buys $1 million in stock options at Amazon. Gee, does that have an appearance of corruption? I mean, come on. Completely ridiculous. We only even know this because the Stock Act requires these disclosures to happen. Otherwise, they could do this behind closed doors. We wouldn't even have any idea. They should be disallowed from investing in this way, from purchasing and selling stocks while they are in Congress. Period. End of story. I don't want to hear any bullshit about blind trust. We all know what a joke that is. It's literally a running joke in DC. They should be disallowed from trading in this manner while they are members of Congress. She's one of the most powerful people in the country. She has more sway over policies that affect the businesses that whose stocks she is trading than almost anybody. It's egregious. It's outrageous. This is like Kelly Loeffler, you guys. It's like, this is when the Republicans do it, the Democrats complain. When the Democrats do it, the Republicans complain. Everybody's fucking wrong. Everybody's corrupt. Everybody is brazenly violating, if not laws, everybody's principle, right? We all understand this is wrong. It's just we've kind of legalized corruption in this country. We've kind of legalized quid pro quo behavior. We've kind of legalized insider trading for the very most powerful members of our federal government. So, and I don't know, just that this is done so brazenly. She's worth, like, you guys, they're worth like $100 million or something. Okay. They don't need the extra 5 million they just made on Alphabet. So the fact that they are still willing, when it makes no difference to their lifestyle whatsoever, to engage in this kind of behavior despite the clear appearance of corruption, that just tells you how routine this is in DC. That tells you how unaddressed corruption is in DC. It's just everyday behavior. It's just routine. It's just normal. It's, if you said, if you know, showed this clip to somebody in DC, they'd probably shrug and say, well, yeah, so it's just become such a normal thing to do. And her behavior here kind of demonstrates the extent to which it's been normalized and deemed acceptable in Washington, D.C. But Democrats, just as corrupt as Republicans when it comes to financial bullshit like this, insider trading and corruption and all that kind of stuff. They're, you know, liberal voters seem to oppose it more than conservative voters do, but that does not track up to the DC level, if you will. So I told you guys I have a positive story for you. This is very positive to me. Iceland has tested a 4-day work week and seen fantastic results. I have talked previously about how automation should benefit everybody instead of just big business owners. Instead of just benefiting the billionaire class, the donor class, automation should be lowering everybody's hours. It should be improving out all of our lives across the board. This is one way to do that. Give everybody a 3-day weekend every week and you know, let the hours decrease as automation fills in. Automation, by the way, just a note on the side, also very overstated. Like, we're never going to run out of work. Just an example, like, it used to be over 90% of the economy was in food because we literally needed that many people to farm to create enough food for the country. Now it's way below like 10%. I think it's even below 5% of the economy that's in food production because automation meant that less people could do the same amount of work. That kind of benefit should hold true, you know, for all of us, not just the owners of whatever industry is being automated. So automation often overstated. New jobs are always, technology both eliminates and creates jobs. Give an example. Go back 100 years and tell somebody 100 years ago that there'd be billions of dollars in creating applications for smartphones. Tell someone back then that that would be a job that you could make really good money at, right? Like, so new jobs are created with technology as automation also eliminates other jobs. But if we handle it properly from a policy perspective, that automation should benefit everybody. It should be a positive, not something to be concerned about. But because our economy is currently set up just to benefit the billionaire class, it's a deep concern for people that, like, automation is going to take my job, they're going to hoard the profits, and I'm going to get nothing out of it. It's a legitimate concern because of how we've structured our economy, because of the policies that we've set up. So this is a way, one of them, that we could, you know, sort of force that benefit to be more spread out than it currently is. So I'm reading here from the Seattle Times. Iceland tested a 4-day work week. Employees were productive and happier, researchers say. Several large-scale trials of a 4-day work week in Iceland were an overwhelming success, with many workers shifting to shorter hours without affecting their productivity and in some cases improving it, in what researchers call groundbreaking evidence for the efficacy of working time reduction. Some of the trial's key findings showed that a shorter work week translated into increased well-being of employees among a range of indicators from stress and burnout to health and work-life balance. These issues have become more pressing as reports of burnout among employees around the world have risen after more than a year of pandemic-related stress and deteriorated mental health. I want to draw a comparison here. I'm a total sports nerd, for those of you who don't know. There's a lot of conversations going on in various sports leagues, particularly the NBA, about what they call load management. So it's been recognized that athletes who have to perform on a regular basis at the highest level benefit from some rest. Who would have thought, right? Like, it's this very obvious concept that if you're doing grueling physical work, which like something like football or basketball can be, that you might benefit from some time off before the important game or before the playoffs or whatever. Okay. It's like, this has been a big talk in the major sports leagues. That obviously also holds true for a whole plethora of people who are working laborious jobs around the country. Even if your job isn't physically grueling, working 40 or 50 hours a week at anything will burn you out over time. So that concept that has been applied to these professional athletes who make $20 million a year should also be applied to everybody else. The idea that our lives could be improved by 5 or 10 less hours at work a week is so obvious, but has been resisted because of our economic structure, our capitalistic setup, right? This is a way that we could actually spread the benefits of automation out. This is a way that we could improve people's mental health and physical health and livelihood, the fulfillment that they get out of their life, etc. And what is it that we're doing with policy if that's not the goal? The goal should always be to create an environment where people can live more fulfilling lives. And this is one such way. But it would cut into the profits of the very top, which is why it is so strongly resisted by the political establishment. This is a fantastic result in Iceland. Good on them for doing this kind of test. And I hope that these kinds of things continue to happen and continue to move the needle on these conversations that I think are very important. We should be working less, you guys. It's a no-brainer. You hear from, like, I don't know how many of you have ever talked to like a young doctor or a young lawyer coming fresh out of school. It's like, you're overworked to fucking death. It's insane. I worked fast food a bunch growing up, and my managers, the GM in any fast food place or really any restaurant period, the GM is screwed. Okay. General manager is usually the lowest salary member who then basically gets paid as though they're working 40, and they almost always work 50 or 60-hour weeks, you guys. I've had numerous general managers tell me, like when I was at Jack in the Box working the drive-through, I was like the 16-year-old working the drive-through part-time for minimum wage. And my GM's like, you make more per hour than I do because I'm working 60 a week. So like it's we are overworking significant portions of our society. Large parts of our communities are overworked at their job, whether it's physically grueling or whether it's more mental stress. And that needs to be addressed if we're serious about improving people's lives and mental health. And think about like the second layer of all this: more time to spend with your family. That's going to also benefit your kids, your loved ones, your friends. Everybody gets to benefit in your life from you having more time to be involved with them, to socialize, to do things you enjoy, to exercise. How many people work too much to work out? How much healthier would they be if they had the time to work out? How many people work too much to cook? How many people could eat healthier if they had the time to grocery shop and cook on a regular basis? Like the reverberating effects of having people work less, it's just unbelievable. And then it all kind of becomes a positive cycle too, because you're in a better mental place and you have more time to do the things that make your life more fulfilling. It all becomes a positive cycle. So fantastic job here from Iceland, testing this out and being serious about, like, let's give people more time to enjoy their lives. Let's have a more fulfilled country. This is just a very inspirational story to me, and I hope that you all will continue pushing for those kinds of policies. That's one that doesn't get a lot of attention, you guys. We talk about Medicare for all, we talk about a Green New Deal, and those are like very important priorities. We talk about a jobs guarantee a lot. We talk about MMT, very important priorities. I rarely hear people talking about cutting hours at work. And it's something that we just are capable of doing right now. So I would love to see, you know, a 4-day work week or something that kind of forces that, like saying overtime is now 35 a week or something, and then that forces companies to hire an extra couple people to fill in the hours and give everybody less hours. Like that kind of policy, I think, would be very beneficial. Now, it has to be paired with better wages, because you can't take 5 hours a week away from an already desperate hourly worker who's struggling to pay their rent. So this is where like Fadl Kaboub talks about the layer cake and how these policies have to kind of go together and compound each other. But we are capable of working fewer hours and creating more jobs as we do that. And creating a more fulfilled and happy society. So this was a positive story, and I'm inspired by Iceland's test here. So I wanted to talk a little bit, just briefly, about the New York City mayor race. I've talked about this a couple times previously. Eric Adams has won the primary, which means he's going to be mayor of New York. And Eric Adams is pretty, conservative. He's an ex-police captain. He's got close ties to big real estate in New York. He's a very establishment-friendly kind of guy. And he looks, very likely to be the next mayor of New York. This was a little bit of an interesting race in the sense that ranked choice voting was applied for the first time in New York City. So there were some questions for weeks. I think it's been 2 or 3 weeks since that vote actually happened, about who was going to win. Obviously, Andrew Yang was for a long time a major candidate, but fell off at the end, and I believe finished 4th. But, for a number of reasons, this got a lot of attention, and obviously, as the biggest city in the country, it always gets a lot of attention. But Eric Adams, not exactly a firebrand leftist. Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams has won the Democratic primary for mayor of New York City after appealing to the political center and promising to strike the right balance between fighting crime and ending racial injustice in policing. He pretty viscerally opposed defunding the police. As a cop, that makes sense. A former police captain, Adams would be the city's second black mayor if elected. He triumphed over a large Democratic field in New York's first major race to use ranked choice voting. Results from the latest tabulations released Tuesday showed him leading former city sanitation commissioner Catherine Garcia by 8,426 votes, or a little more than 1 percentage point. So this has been kind of deemed a bad indication for the left, in the sense that there were really no lefties, like true lefties, that were serious contenders for this seat. And the fact that it kind of came down to Adams and Garcia and Yang is disappointing for many on the left. It's a very important seat. A lot of people say mayor of New York is probably the most difficult political job in the country, and I could see that being the case. Often a city like New York can lead on issues because they're such a big city. If we were to get a firebrand leftist in there who actually was serious about implementing progressive policy, then the rest of the country might follow, because you can say, look, the biggest city in our country implemented this policy successfully. You know what I mean? You can demonstrate it. And it's sad to see that no progressives were really competitive for that seat, right? So Eric Adams will be the next mayor of New York City, barring some sort of crazy happenstance in the general election. He will be the next New York City mayor. I wanted to briefly talk about a story that has gotten a whole lot of attention for the past couple of weeks, and I think rightfully so. Britney Spears' conservatorship, excuse me, which is deeply problematic, and I think a lot of people might not realize the extent to which it's problematic. Some sort of what word should I use for this? Some publicly odd behavior that Britney Spears engaged in a while back led to a conservatorship with her dad and other close members of her family, and it effectively has left her with little autonomy over her own life. Her dad decides when she does what, when she works. She has apparently had an inability to date people she wanted to date because of this. She has apparently had times where she cannot see her children because of this. Her finances are controlled and dictated by her father, etc., etc. Deeply problematic situation. And while this was getting a whole lot of attention, just for a little bit of contrast, Bill Cosby was released. So we have this sort of contrast in our legal system and in the results that we see from our so-called justice system, where she is denied. She tried to basically get the conservatorship, like get her father removed from it. She was denied that by the judge, where Bill Cosby essentially gets out on a technicality. And my understanding is that that technicality was like correctly ruled by the judges, but nonetheless, it's a technicality, right? So Bill Cosby gets out scot-free after he is known to have raped like dozens of women, drugged and raped dozens of women. He's done public interviews laughing about it. Okay. That contrast is deeply troubling and indicative of how unsuccessful we are at actually achieving quote unquote justice. And this is, I talked about this with Irami Osei Frempong a couple weeks ago when we were talking about critical race theory. And he talked about this concept of formalism, that the law is supposed to apply exactly equally to everybody. But it's very, very obvious that that's not the case. There are racial discriminations. There are classist discriminations. There are certain crimes that would be beneficial or like that can only really be committed by the impoverished communities. The example Irami gave is you can tell a billionaire and a homeless person that it's illegal to sleep under the bridge, and you're applying it equally. Both people will be, ticketed or jailed if they sleep under the bridge. Equal application. Well, obviously that affects one person and does not affect the other. So this idea that our legal system is somehow equal in its application is impossible on the surface. And this is a very clear example of that. Just a very clear example of that. How many people are still in jail right now on marijuana charges, like possession of marijuana, that they're going to be in jail for years? How many people are still in jail right now for that? While we let the millionaires open the pot shops, you know what I mean? Profit off of it. Over and over again, we can find these examples, right? Policing, there's obvious racist elements to policing. There's obvious classist elements to policing, on and on and on. And this is a very troubling story. Brittany also just want to note, she's done like a bunch of tours since she's been under this stranglehold of her father. Well, if she's capable of making you millions of dollars, dude, then she's capable of making her own decisions. You can't have it both ways. You're capable of getting out on stage and performing so that I can make millions of dollars, but you're not capable of making decisions about how you want to spend those millions of dollars. Ridiculous. Clear cash grab. Clear control grab and power grab. To treat your own child like that, I mean, shame on this fucking asshole. But just a crazy contrast there between Cosby and Spears, and I wanted to make sure to note that, considering how much attention that story has gotten over the past couple of weeks. And another contrast that I'd like to draw, we've talked a bit about the infrastructure negotiations where there's this sort of, as Brianna Joy Gray put it, a cosplay bipartisanship. The establishment is sitting here and cosplaying bipartisanship to sort of fetishize the concept and hide behind it in terms of their unwillingness to actually implement bold progressive policies and use reconciliation to actually use the power that voters gave the Democratic Party to implement this kind of change, when really they just don't want to implement this kind of change. Contrast I'm talking about is between Bernie and Republicans. First article I have here, Business Insider. Bernie Sanders said he'd oppose a $3 trillion Democrat-only infrastructure plan since it's much too low, potentially setting up spending showdown with Manchin. So Bernie here rightly pointing out that this is a grossly inadequate, even $3 trillion, which is presented by the mainstream media as like this big, bold number. You guys, we need 10 trillion just to get to par with our infrastructure. If we want like outstanding infrastructure, pristine infrastructure, we would have to spend more. If we want to address the climate crisis with this bill in any substantive way, shape, or form, we would have to spend more than 10 trillion. If we wanted to put other progressive priorities into this bill, we would have to spend more than the 10 trillion. Democrats are proposing 3 through reconciliation as a Democrat-only infrastructure package. 3. Pathetic. Utterly pathetic. It's not even close. So good on Bernie Sanders here. Bernie has, obviously disappointed me in some ways. I think a lot of people who, if you get elected to the Senate, you're going to disappoint. Like the way the Senate is currently constituted, it's virtually impossible for anybody to get into the Senate and then implement, bold progressive change. Virtually impossible. But Bernie right here, very much taking a bold stance in a way that progressives can appreciate. 3 trillion ain't enough. Come back to me when you have a serious number. We need more. That's a positive sign that Bernie may be willing to put his foot down on this particular issue. And I hope that others will follow, because we desperately need a massive Green New Deal. I covered earlier the climate crisis and how rapidly it's accelerating and showing itself. We need a massive Green New Deal like 2 decades ago. So this is a positive sign here that there might be some pushback to the grossly inadequate proposals on infrastructure. But I did want to contrast that with the way that Republicans are talking about Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, very openly praising their willingness to obstruct any robust policies that the more left side of the Democratic Party might be pushing for. So this is a clip of a few Republicans basically praising Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, asking people to call their offices and thank them. This should tell you all you need to know about the role that those two are playing in these negotiations and every other negotiation that's going through the Senate.
We have a bunch of people running around, particularly progressives, who all they want to talk about is, well, let the people's will be done. No. We don't want the people's will to be done immediately, because you have the passions of the majority that remember, our Constitution was set up to protect who? Minority rights, not the majority rights.
But the reality is they are pushing as far as they can. Fortunately for us, the filibuster is still in effect in the Senate. Without that, we would be dead meat, and this thing would be, then we'd be having a little bit more frantic discussion than we're having today. But thank goodness for Sinema and Joe Manchin.
I like it when AOC is going after Joe Manchin. Like, this is great for me. It makes my job easier as a conservative, because I can go to Joe Manchin or Kyrsten Sinema and be like, hey guys, and I'm really sorry you're having to go through that. That's just a shame. Nobody should be treated like this. I just really thank you for standing for the country. And all of you in this room, people at home on Zoom, let me tell you right now, if you want to do one thing to keep the republic afloat, call Joe Manchin's office, call Kyrsten Sinema's office, be polite, smile as you talk on the phone. If you talk on the phone with a smile, your voice sounds better. You just be like, hi, I'm here to talk to Senator Joe Manchin and thank him for keeping the filibuster intact. I'm just a Republican voter from state X, doesn't matter, but I just want to say thank you. Because what's happening up here is the fact that they've decided not to blow open the filibuster, in a lot of respects, is going to save the Republic from the worst things that the left wants to do. And H.R. 1 is the tip of the iceberg.
So we just got to hold the line right now. Keeping the filibuster is a big part of that, and all the other elements that I know y'all are discussing this week.
It's a lot easier to pass giveaways than it is to take them away. Really? And everybody thinks, oh, well, we'll just take them away. No, we won't. No, we won't. So please, if any of you have any thoughts about the idea that a filibuster removal, it was a good deal, and I know the previous president was for it and still is, it's a bad idea. Call Joe Manchin and say thank you. Seriously. Yeah. Call Kyrsten Sinema and say thank you.
So Rick Santorum there, the last guy talking, who's usually one of the biggest morons to walk the face of the planet, proves that a broken clock is right twice a day. He admits, did you guys hear that? He actually just admitted it's a lot harder, it's a lot easier to pass the policies that he calls them giveaways, but it's progressive social policies. It's a lot easier to pass that stuff than it is to undo it. Think about what an admission that is. If we were to pass a jobs guarantee, if we were to pass housing reform, if we were to pass a healthcare policy that's actually, reasonable and adequate, it would be impossible to undo it. Even something as inadequate as Obamacare, they couldn't undo it, you guys. They had majorities. They had the White House. They couldn't undo it. They knew what was going to happen to them politically if they did. Imagine them trying to undo a robust Medicare for All system or an NHS. They wouldn't be able to do it. And even moron Rick Santorum just admitted that. This is why we need to pass these policies. It neuters their ability to fight them. It is very obvious, and he just admitted that. But that's just a little side note. The point of showing you guys that clip is to demonstrate the difference between the establishment portions of the Democratic Party and the more Bernie Sanders type people. So the establishment is hiding behind Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema in this case to not have to answer for why they don't support certain policies. And if Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema continue to support the filibuster, they're effectively gatekeeping for the Republican Party. And there's all these Republicans saying, go thank them for gatekeeping for us. That should tell you all you need to know about the dynamic. Should tell you all you need to know about Joe Manchin, all you need to know about Kristen Sinema. Quite a contrast there between those two and Bernie. So we've talked in the past about Israel and their new prime minister, Naftali Bennett. We've talked about their, continued siege and aggression, and then a ceasefire that really wasn't really a ceasefire, at least not for very long. But we have an update here. They've continued to bomb parts of the Gaza Strip, and this article here in Al Jazeera is talking about the protesters that were attacked and wounded. Israeli forces open fire on Palestinians, hundreds wounded. The Palestine Red Crescent reported 379 protesters were wounded, 31 of them by live ammunition. They're just shooting protesters, you guys. Israeli forces opened fire on hundreds of Palestinian demonstrators who rallied against an illegal outpost in the occupied West Bank on Friday, with more than 370 people wounded, including 31 hit by live ammunition. Drones dropped tear gas canisters and smoke filled the air at the scene of the protest in the West Bank town of Bida. Apologies if I'm butchering any of these names, near Nablus, where Palestinians protested illegal land confiscation. Demonstrators burned tires and threw rocks at Israeli forces. Local media reports said witnesses said Israeli troops fired live rounds and rubber-coated steel bullets at the demonstrators after Friday prayers in Bida. Again, apologies if I'm butchering that. They just shot people. And even they say rubber-coated steel bullets. You want to get hit by that? That could freaking kill you. Imagine if that hit your eye. I mean, seriously, the idea that is somehow lesser or acceptable or like some form of crowd control that is appropriate is ridiculous. If I shot somebody with a rubber-coated steel bullet, I'd get charged with attempted murder. Okay? Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous that we deem these like dropping tear gas is somehow okay. That's internationally illegal in war, you guys. Seattle PD continues to use tear gas too. We have such a skewed framing on this stuff that we deem certain aggressive, violent acts as acceptable forms of policing. These are demonstrators. They're protesting. And this is how they're met. Hundreds of them wounded. 31 shot with live ammunition. This is Israel, you guys. This is how they've conducted themselves for essentially since their existence. The continued illegal occupations, the continued illegal settlements, the violence that is reaped against a group of people that has no capacity to defend themselves or fight back. This is not a war. This is not a conflict. This is ethnic cleansing. And it's continuing here. When you protest said ethnic cleansing, you get shot. Naftali Bennett is incredibly dangerous. Some of you will remember the clip that I showed of Mehdi Hassan interviewing him years ago. And Mehdi pressed him on his willingness to cite his religious texts. He was citing the Torah as an answer for his geopolitical positions. And Mehdi said, "Look, are you saying that the Torah is more important than your country's Supreme Court findings?" And he basically said yes. I mean, he didn't literally say yes, but he went on and on about the Bible. Mehdi, you need to read the Bible. The guy is a religious fundamentalist who is openly Zionist and in favor of these illegal occupations and settlements. And now he's prime minister, and we see the results. Live ammunition fired at protesters. 31 of them shot. Hundreds more wounded. This is egregious conduct, should be called out by all, and especially considering the leverage that the United States has over this situation, it should be called out by American citizens and in an attempt to at least pressure our government to do the right thing, though I have no doubt that Biden will continue his support for this oppression and for this ethnic cleansing, unfortunately. Very interesting story here. There's been a massive wealth transfer underway. We know that through the COVID pandemic and impending economic crisis, that the response from the government has very much favored the most elite in our society, the wealthy in our society, that the bailouts were skewed towards the top. We know that the way we've set our economy up, as soon as there's any sort of recovery, that's going to benefit those who had the ability to purchase property during the down times, which again just benefits the most wealthy and the financial institutions. We saw, these big time financial powerhouses like BlackRock buying up rental properties as another form of income. So we're seeing consolidation of property and assets in a way that leads to a skewed recovery. And this has been obvious at every step, but we're starting to see some pretty strong indications of what that has resulted in. I have a piece here in the Wall Street Journal. Older Americans stockpiled a record $35 trillion. The time has come to give it away. I've also seen this cited as $37 trillion, so just wanted to note that. The greatest wealth transfer in modern history has begun. Baby boomers and older Americans have spent decades accumulating an enormous stockpile of money. At the end of this year's first quarter, Americans aged 70 and above had a net worth of nearly $35 trillion, according to Federal Reserve data. That amounts to 27% of all U.S. wealth, up from 20% 3 decades ago. Guys, that's a massive, massive increase in just 30 years for a generation. That's a massive increase. Their wealth is equal to 157% of U.S. gross domestic product, more than double the proportion 30 years ago, federal data show. Again, massive increase in just 30 years. This is what neoliberalism has resulted in. Now they have started parceling it out to their heirs and others, unleashing a torrent of economic activity, including buying homes, starting businesses, and giving to charity. And many recipients are guided by different priorities and politics than their givers. Older generations will hand down some $70 trillion between 2018 and 2042, according to research and consulting firm Cerulli Associates. I'm really bad with pronunciations if you guys haven't figured that out just yet. Roughly $61 trillion will go to heirs, increasingly millennials and Generation Xers, with the balance going to philanthropy. The transfer will provide another display of the outsized economic power of baby boomers who came of age during a wave of post-World War II prosperity and drove the economy through many stages of their lives. So this is just a story that kind of details the extent to which we have a massive wealth gap in this country. It's both age but more so class, because I just want to note, there are tons of boomers who are living in extreme poverty who we have not taken care of and are having to live out their glory days in impoverished situations, living in struggle. But there is clearly a generational gap there. Millennials make up it. We're the largest generation in the country now, just by population, and yet we have like some 5% of assets. Compare that to the 27% that boomers have. No, they're less in population than we are. And some of that you can say, like, some of that is accumulating wealth over your life, but you can't explain that kind of a major gap. You just can't. And it provides, think about what kind of an advantage this provides for families of massive wealth. Effectively, people of my generation, millennials and younger, cannot afford to purchase houses on the by and large. But those who can are those who have parents or grandparents who can afford to help them out. Okay? Now, I want everybody to be able to buy a house. I got no problem with parents or grandparents helping their family buy a house. I have a problem with the extent to which there is a gap between the haves and the have-nots. I have a problem with the have-nots having no ability to purchase houses and having to piss away rent money every month for the rest of their life if they're so lucky to afford a place to stay. So this is revelatory of the bigger picture problems that, again, we always talk about here at RP, the underlying financial corruption, the rapacious conduct, etc. This is the result of that. You have haves and you have have-nots. And the haves now have massive wealth to start new companies that their children and grandchildren can thrive off of, to buy property that will accumulate generational wealth, etc. While the rest of us are left out to dry. And to tie this back into the climate change story earlier, who's going to be able to escape it, you guys? The people with the 35 trillion or 37 trillion, whatever it is. That's who. And their offspring. So we've created a dynamic where there are haves and have-nots, and there's a very clear divide between the two, and that is going to result in catastrophic problems for the have-nots. So this is just a sort of macro indication of a lot of the things that we talk about and how harmful the results of that kind of corruption and greedy behavior can be. Really sad, terrifying story here to go along with a couple of other sad and terrifying stories I have brought you guys today. Apologies that I'm not the bearer of good news this particular week. A quick story. I've talked a lot about Amazon and the role that they play in opposing workers' rights, the role that they play in sort of monopolizing certain aspects of the economy, mistreating their workers, etc. Bezos is absolutely awful. He has stepped down as CEO and gotten $10 billion richer the week that he did so. He's still going to be on the board and have, major influence over the company. So it's not like he is completely disinvolving himself, but he has stepped down as CEO. And I believe Dave Clark took over for him, but I might have that wrong. Dave Clark was one of his right-hand men. We covered previously how Clark got a little bit of got in some trouble on Twitter when he lied about their drivers having to piss and shit in bottles and bags in order to make delivery times. Clark insisted that wasn't happening, and Ken Klippenstein took him to school on Twitter. If you haven't seen that, that was from months ago. Absolutely hilarious. This is in Forbes. Jeff Bezos stepped down as Amazon CEO this week and got more than $10 billion richer. If Jeff Bezos' first week without being CEO of Amazon is any indication, Bezos' fortune is safe and his protege, Andy Jassy, at the helm. Amazon stock surged 5.9% this week to new record highs, boosting Bezos' fortune by $10.6 billion to an estimated $212.4 billion, far outpacing the S&P 500's 0.4% gain and the Dow Jones Industrial Average's 0.2% gain during the holiday shortened trading week. Amazon's climb likely had less to do with its CEO transition than with the Department of Defense's announcement Tuesday that it was canceling the $10 billion Joint Enterprise Defense Infrastructure Cloud contract it had awarded to Microsoft in 2019. That was what I was talking about earlier with the Pelosi stock issue. This is why it's important to note that she bought $1 million in call options of Amazon. Amazon filed a lawsuit after that decision, alleging that Donald Trump applied improper pressure to snub the company. The former president has a long history of verbal attacks against Bezos, who also owns the Washington Post. I like how they frame that as an anti-Trump thing and not as like obviously, yeah, Trump's awful and he levies personal attacks against anybody who criticizes him. But they just slip in there Bezos, who also owns the Washington Post, as though that's not insanely problematic. The media's framing it drives me so fucking nuts. Carrying on, with a new administration in the White House, the Pentagon retreated and said in a press release that it is once again soliciting pitches from both Amazon and Microsoft, with the existing Jedi contract no longer meeting its needs. Amazon stock rose by 4.7% on the news Tuesday after the long weekend. Its strong week also made Bezos' ex-wife Mackenzie Scott richer, lifting her net worth by $3.5 billion to an estimated $62.5 billion. The competition reopening for the Pentagon's cloud contract also helped Oracle's stock increase by 7.3% for the week, making co-founder Larry Ellison $6 billion richer. This is how shit works, you guys. If you have a whole boatload of money, you can continue to just make money for having money. And that, that Mackenzie Scott, I think she got 30 million in that divorce settlement. I might have that figure wrong, but it was something in that ballpark, 30 million. Now she's worth 62.5. That's absurd. That's absurd. The idea that there's anything meritocratic about that is so out in left field, it's hardly even worth addressing. And yet that is a belief of many people in this country, that somehow the billions of dollars that these people have is earned. Just absolutely insane. Another not so positive story here. The Supreme Court has made a ruling that really gutted voting rights, the Voting Rights Act. This was a really bad decision that, again, caught very little attention in the mainstream media. This is in the Atlantic. The court's voting rights decision was worse than people think. The conservative majority's opinion has declared that voter fraud, not racial discrimination, is a threat to the American system of representation. Before we dive into the details here, it was Justice Alito, who came out and basically said, and again, I want to reference my interview with Ira Miose Frimpong, the funky academic, talking about formalism, this concept of formalism in our legal system. And he talked about how you just have to kind of like write something in the correct way, or like word something in a way where the court can rule in your favor, even though they know that the underlying implication might violate the principle that they're trying to uphold, if that kind of makes sense. And Alito kind of confirmed that. Alito basically said there's nothing there's nothing on the books that says that there's discrimination against Black voters. So even though the policies that are being implemented in conservative states across the country very clearly affect the Black community's ability to vote, and intentionally so, Alito essentially said, because it's not explicit, we don't have to care. We can let people's voting rights be oppressed, so long as it's not done in an explicit enough way that we would be violating, people's constitutional rights. So again, reading from the Atlantic here, the Voting Rights Act regime as we knew it is gone, and it's not coming back. Once thought of as the crown jewel of the Second Reconstruction, the VRA has lost its luster. For the past decade or so, the Supreme Court has systemically reduced the scope and reach of the law. The court's decision last week in Brnovich versus Democratic National Committee is only the latest case, and certainly will not be the last, to interpret the act in a manner that will sideline it permanently. The Democratic National Committee, along with other plaintiffs, challenged 2 Arizona voting laws that it argued discriminated against voters of color. One law required voters to cast their ballot in their assigned precinct, or else their vote would not count. A second law prohibited third parties, such as voting rights activists, from collecting mail-in ballots from voters who were unable or unwilling to submit those ballots themselves, even though it expressly allowed caregivers and family members to do so. The plaintiffs argued that these laws violated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, along with the 14th and 15th Amendments to the United States Constitution. Section 2 of the VRA prohibits the government from providing less opportunity for voters of color to participate in the political process. It protects voters from voting rules that are intended to or have the effect of discriminating on the basis of race. So again, Alito effectively finding that if it's not explicitly stated that it's going to discriminate against Black voters, then it's okay. That is a really, really ridiculous finding. And it's really, quite frankly, a ridiculous perspective to have on law and policy in general. The idea that we're going to put our blinders on, intentionally put our blinders on, to any reverberating effects from the policies that we pass is effectively what Alito is embracing. Put on those blinders. I don't have to care how my ruling impacts people, so long as I am not explicitly ruling in a manner that would affect those people. This is outrageous, you guys. It's beyond unreasonable, and will again have massive reverberating effects on the ability of, in particular, Black people to vote. So this is disgusting that we're sitting here in 2021 and we're still gutting voting rights in racist and oppressive ways. Just absolutely disgusting. Shame on the Supreme Court. They've had a number of egregious, terrible findings as of late, and unfortunately not catching a whole lot of attention, which I find very stunning, because I think you guys will remember how much of a topic this was during the election. You have to vote Joe, or else you're helping the conservatives take over more seats on the Supreme Court. This was 2016 and 2020. And yet now, as they use that power for horrendous ends, we don't see much coverage or discussion on that issue. That's unfortunate. They've had a number of terrible rulings lately, one in favor of Goldman Sachs. They've just a number of really terrible rulings from the Supreme Court. One that allowed Nestle to engage in slavery overseas as long as it wasn't here. I mean, just no-brainer findings that they're getting completely wrong. And again, just really want to shout out Irami for kind of explaining that concept of formalism. I'm going to go clip out. We talked for about an hour or so about critical race theory, and he talked about critical legal theory a little bit, and that's what I keep referencing, is that formalism concept. I'm going to crop that interview out and post it again for those that didn't see it on my live stream a couple weeks ago, because I thought that was a very important discussion. And Irami always bring in a fantastic perspective. I wanted to talk a little bit about COVID here. These new strains are incredibly problematic, and our lack of willingness to expedite the vaccination process is going to come back to bite us in the ass, in a number of ways, really. But inhumanity of it aside, even in a bigger, broader sense, it's going to create variants that may deem some of our vaccines ineffective or significantly less effective, which means that all around the world, these variants are going to be causing problems, even in places in the world where things are relatively under control. And impoverished nations are having one hell of a time trying to get enough vaccines to get to a safe place, which is in and of itself a travesty. This is an NPR. Where are the newest COVID hotspots? Mostly places with low vaccination rates. As the weather warmed up this year, coronavirus case numbers plummeted and life in the U.S. started to feel almost normal. But in recent weeks, that progress has stalled. The vaccination campaign has slowed, and the Delta variant is spreading rapidly. And new infections, which had started to plateau about a month ago, are going up slightly nationally. New localized hotspots are emerging, especially in stretches of the South, the Midwest, and the West. And according to an analysis NPR conducted with Johns Hopkins University, those surges are likely driven by pockets of dangerously low vaccination rates. I think we should brace ourselves to see case increases, particularly in unvaccinated populations, says Jennifer Nuzzo, a senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. Cases are rising in many states. The number of people catching the virus has risen in more than half of the states over the past 2 weeks, and 18 states have greater numbers of new infections now compared with 4 weeks ago, including Arkansas, Florida, Iowa, Missouri, and Oklahoma, where new daily cases have doubled. It's an early trend, Nuzzo said. Unfortunately, looking at what's happening in individual states, I do worry we will continue to see national numbers increase. The number of people getting hospitalized for COVID-19 has also started rising again in 9 states, according to Johns Hopkins. Arkansas, Florida, Hawaii, Iowa, Missouri, Nebraska, Texas, Wisconsin, and Mississippi. I expect that more states would join that list in a few weeks as they continue to see case increases. So even in the United States, where we have a relatively high vaccination rate, we're seeing this problem pop up again, and these variants causing wreaking some havoc. So imagine how countries that have almost no one vaccinated are doing right now. because of our unwillingness to go forward with the TRIPS waiver, or at this point, it's Europe's unwillingness to go forward with the TRIPS waiver and waive those IP rights for big pharma companies. Imagine what it's like in those countries that don't have the kind of access to the vaccine that we have. This was so obvious from the start, and yet what did we do? We chose to prioritize big pharma's profits yet again. Addie Barkin, when Joe Biden was running for president, Addie Barkin interviewed him and had a fantastic question. I would not have thought to ask this question, but he was ahead of the game on it. Addie Barkin asked Joe Biden, will you waive IP rights if the United States is the first to produce a vaccine? And Biden gave an unequivocal yes. Yet what did he do? He drug his feet on it for months and then finally came out and said he's in favor of the TRIPS waiver. So now Europe is holding that up. Just when we're talking about a pandemic, it shouldn't be difficult to understand how much of an impact a day has, let alone weeks, let alone months, let alone a year, in terms of our unwillingness to go forward with policies that would be helpful to impoverished countries and impoverished areas of our own country. You can't overstate how much when something like this is spreading as fast as it is and as contagious as it is, how much that time gap impacts how much harm the virus causes, how many deaths are due to each day that we've drug our feet on this. Just really egregious stuff. And now it's even starting to come back and bite the countries that have gotten ahead on vaccinations, like the United States. So just a really sad story once again. I wish I had happier news for you all today. And the last story I wanted to cover, I have a clip here. This is Mehdi Hasan talking to Jim Clyburn. And Clyburn is talking about sloganeering and kind of how he opposes things like Medicare for All and defunding the police. And Mehdi Hasan pressed him a little bit. So I wanted to show you guys this clip, and then we'll come back and discuss. Give me just one moment. I have to find it. Here we go.
I mean, I guess the context is you have been quite critical of the left of your party. The Democrats lost a net dozen House seats last November. Despite winning the White House, you've been very critical of the party's progressive wing for, quote, sloganeering, you say, with movements like Medicare for All and defund the police. In May, though, Congressman, a focus group study from the polling firm Lake Research Partners found that swing voters paid only a little attention to Republican attacks on socialism or defunding the police, which they viewed as divisive fear-mongering, and that the bigger problem was that many voters didn't have a clear grasp of what the Democratic Party stood for. So is the whole attention on defund the police really a deflection by the party leadership from your own failures? That's what your critics on the left would say.
That is absolutely poppycock. I know what I'm talking about. I'm out here with the voters every day. I did a town hall meeting last night in Jasper County, South Carolina. I can tell you, defund the police is a non-starter, even with black people. And if you don't think that's true, then look at the results of what just happened in New York City's election. So the proof is in the pudding. I know what I'm talking about. I talk to people every day. And defund the police is a chokehold around the Democratic Party. And let me remind you, if you're going to categorize left and right, I'm on the left of my party. Nobody can call me anything but a progressive. And been one all of my life. Met my wife in jail, being progressive. So come on.
And I appreciate that. But Congressman, just on the specific issues, because I know you care strongly about this, when you say defund the police, I'm not talking about the popularity of it. I'm talking about whether it hurt your party. None of the candidates in the November House elections ran on defund the police. You mentioned New York. Not a single New York mayoral candidate ran on defund the police. So I'm not sure why. I mean, I know why Republicans keep going on and on about it. I'm not sure why you seem to think it's such a big problem for your party.
Ask Jimmy Harrison, who was running for the United States Senate here in South Carolina. Just ask him. Ask Abigail Spanberger up in Virginia why I said it. I said it because it's real. It's a real problem. We should stop sloganeering. In 1960, Burn, Baby Burn destroyed our movement. And defund the police will do the same thing to progressive movements today. This kind of slogan, Aaron, does us no good.
I take your point on sloganizing. I guess the problem is I watched a lot of Republican attack ads last November. They did mention defund the police. They also mentioned Nancy Pelosi. I'm sure you wouldn't say Nancy Pelosi's to blame for you losing. They mentioned corruption. The problem is Republicans are going to attack you always as socialists and lefties. And I think the problem becomes, are you kind of agreeing with their attack on your own party by talking so much about it? I guess that's the discussion. Last word to you, Congressman.
I know what I feel. I know. One single Democrat to tell me that Nancy Pelosi is a problem. I've had plenty Democrats to tell me defund the police is a problem. So, look, I only know what the facts are.
I mean, what do you even say about that? Like where do you even start with that? Yes, it is true that defund the police is currently not a popular slogan. That's true. But almost every slogan starts unpopular, and then you have to like plant the political seeds and have the discussions and explain to the populace why something is a good idea. So while defund the police itself as a slogan is unpopular, what it actually means is quite popular. When you say to people, hey, we should take the resources that are currently going to our oppressive law enforcement institutions and use them to uplift society and nip crime in the bud from the roots and improve life for impoverished communities and marginalized communities, people say, yeah, that sounds great. So Clyburn here really just proving how completed his pivot towards the establishment has been. Clyburn obviously was a civil rights hero back in the day, marched with Dr. King, but he's now spent decades in the House essentially hiding behind that to deploy establishment politics and policies. And you heard him there. He said, like, I met my wife in jail. I'm on the left of my party. Those two things are not at all connected, dude. Because you were part of a protest in like the 60s and were on the right side of an issue in like the 60s, that doesn't mean you're right now. He's literally the biggest recipient of big pharma money. Gee, I wonder why he opposes Medicare for all. You're not some progressive, hero or champion. No, you're a civil rights hero turned establishment politician who now does big pharma's bidding in the House. Let's just get it really clear. And Pelosi did cost people seats. The Republicans have run against Nancy Pelosi explicitly all over the country ever since she took a leadership position. And it's effective. People can't stand Nancy Pelosi. Just to note, you guys, I want to make sure we're being clear about the actual facts here. For Jim, every single Democratic candidate for the House who endorsed every member of the House who endorsed Medicare for all won their seat back. Every single one. Okay? The handful of people, Jamal Bowman, Rashida Tlaib, Cori Bush, who ran on defunding the police, actually explicitly supported it. What did they do, Jim? They won. They won. So this broad statement that defund the police and Medicare for all killed the Democrats is so laughably ridiculous on the surface. And yet that's like a mainstream opinion. And then when Mehdi pushes back, and by the way, only dude on cable news that like ever gives a good interview. Shout out to Mehdi Hassan for some of the interviews that he has done, just significantly better than almost any other host that you see in the mainstream media. When he pushes back and says, how about Pelosi? How about all the ads they run against Pelosi every single election cycle that focus groups and studies show are way more successful than the like socialism fear-mongering or the defund the police fear-mongering? What about that? And Jim says, well, I haven't heard from any Democrats that Nancy Pelosi is a problem, but I keep hearing from Democrats that defund the police is a problem. Ask Jamie Harrison, ask Abigail Spanberger. Well, okay, you just cited two people, neither of whom endorse defund the police, both of whom are establishment candidates and both of whom lost. You're making our point for us. because I can go cite you the people who endorsed defund the police and won. That's not to say it would be a winning message in every district, you guys. I'm not like naive to the fact that it's not a popular slogan in a lot of communities. But this broad painting with a broad brush that Jim Clyburn likes to do, the progressives are killing the Democratic Party and harming our chances. It's not borne out by the facts. He is not operating in reality when he says that. He's engaging in political wish thinking. He wants that establishment moderate lane to be successful. And he even he was a civil rights hero in the 60s. I think that actually should impact his view on this in the other way, because if you didn't have like Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam taking a more extreme stance than Dr. King and Jim Clyburn, etc., if you didn't have that, then there would have been less success to be had by Dr. King. There wouldn't have been he wouldn't have been a compromise to people if you didn't have the more extreme messaging paired with it. So this idea that there's not value in some inflammatory messaging that actually gets to the point is, again, not borne out by the facts in a way that Jim Clyburn more than most should understand. So he completely detaches from reality when he's making these political points where he tries to slam the left. And he is not the bold progressive that he would portray himself as. In fact, he has influenced politics lately in a right-leaning way. His role in the primary in 2020, he was probably the most influential single person in causing Joe Biden to beat Bernie Sanders. That pivot in South Carolina was absolutely crucial, and Jim Clyburn really did cause it. I don't think Bernie was going to win South Carolina, but if Clyburn hadn't endorsed Joe, Bernie would have been a lot closer, and that would have substantially impacted the rest of the race and what happened on Super Tuesday. So Clyburn, even in as recently as like a year ago, a little over, whatever it was, Clyburn was influencing the Democratic Party to the conservative side while he tries to tell you, I'm the left of my party because I met my wife in jail. I'm sorry. That is such obvious bullshit that you know, it's laughable to treat this guy like he is some sort of authority on this particular topic, even though he is the whip, majority whip in the House right now. So Clyburn, you know, it's sad to see somebody who played the role that he played early in his life becoming such an establishment stooge, but that's exactly what has happened. So that is it for the show today, but I want to leave you guys with a clip here. This is Mike Gravel kind of explaining in detail how the Pentagon paper release came to be. And it was covered by Democracy Now!, but I wanted to bring you guys this clip in honor of Mike. He was a genuine hero, and I hope he rests in power. Thank you all for tuning in this week. Go to realprogressives.org if you want to learn more or support our organization. Follow us at Real Progress US, at RP_in_action. And if you want to follow me, I'm at Luke Parcher Show. Make sure you're getting involved with the March for Medicare for All, and I will see you all next week.
2007 in Portland, Oregon, I moderated an event at the annual conference of the Unitarian Universalist Church in Portland, Oregon, commemorating the publication of the Pentagon Papers by the Beacon Press, their publishing house. One of the main speakers was Alaska Senator Mike Gravel. Today we bring you his extended remarks as he laid out how he received the Pentagon Papers from Washington Post journalist Ben Bagdikian, who in turn had gotten them from Pentagon Papers whistleblower Dan Ellsberg.
Let me just pick up where he left off, because there's a lot of little vignettes, and I'll talk fast, but I want to get all the details out, because I know what you want to know is the inside skinny. You can read the broad lines, but it's what happened to both our lives at the time that Dan calls my office He talks to Joe Rothstein, who was my administrative assistant. My administrative assistant, I was down in the Senate gym getting a massage. I was on a table. And of course, you can't have staff come into the Senate. This is hallowed ground. So, into the Senate gym. So he's knocking at the door. He says, I've got to see the senator. It's an emergency. And he works his way in to get into the massage stall. And the masseur pulls back a little bit, and he whispers down in my ear. He says, somebody wants to give you the Pentagon Papers. I said, man, where is he? He says, he's going to call us back. So, man, I get dressed up real quick. We bolt back to the office, and I'm sitting in my office waiting for this call. Along comes his voice. He says, Senator, would you read the Pentagon Papers as part of your filibuster? I says, yes. Now, please hang up. The reason for that is I have a background in intelligence. When I was 23 years old, I was a top secret control officer. I could classify and I could declassify, and I was 23 years old. So now here are the papers coming at me. I had a sense of what they were, was a history. And of course I had read what the Times had published, and so lo and behold, Dan and I have other conversations. To tell you the truth, our memories are a little vague. He informed me about something that I didn't know, and occasionally I'd done that with him when he was doing his memoir, Secrets. We spent there a couple of days. Oh, is that your interpretation of what you think we did? Yes. Well, no, that's my, oh, no, we did it that way. And what happens, that's human beings. We all have a different read on some of the details. The long and short of it is, he called me in a few days, and he was angry. He's on the phone. He says, why the hell haven't you ever used the papers? And I says, why the hell haven't you got them to me? I don't have them. I haven't heard anything. So he goes back to Ben Begdickian, and Ben then contacts my office. Well, quite candidly, I didn't know who Ben was, but he wanted to get to meet with me. So we meet somewhat secretively on the front steps of the Capitol behind a column in broad daylight during the session. So Ben is standing there. We're talking about it, how we're going to move the papers across. And then out comes Bob Dole, who was one of my enemies. But we're on the same committee, and he walks up, and Begdickian is slipping behind a column, so he can't be seen. So I get rid of Dole fairly fast. And so we go back, and Begdickian had this plan. We're going to meet someplace out in the country, you know, Rock Creek Park in the dark. Hey, wait a second, Ben. I got to tell you, I got a little more experience in this than you have. What we're going to do, here's how we're going to transfer the papers. You're going to come at 12 o'clock at night under the marquee of the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, D.C. at 12 o'clock. You park your car there. I will come up with my car. You open your trunk. I will open my trunk, and I'll pop the papers in, and I'll race off. That's the way we'll do it before God and country, and they won't even know what happened. Well, what happens? A group of Alaska natives walk by. Oh, there's our senator. And they all want to come up and talk with me. And I'm trying to peel them away. Well, I've got to run. I've got to run. And so I got in my car. We did that. We transferred the papers. I sped away, parked my car, came back in, and Ben and I had a coffee. I took the papers home. Where are you going to put them? I brought them home. That's the first time I told my wife. At the time, Rita, I says, I got the Pentagon Papers right here. And of course, the whole world was looking, trying to chase him down and catch him and get the papers. And he said, what are you going to do with them? We're going to put them under the bed, and we're going to sleep on them. That's what we're going to do. We did. Next morning, I'm dyslexic, and so I couldn't read all those papers if it took me a year. And so what happened, I started calling staff in, and I said, look, you're going to come in, you bring a toilet kit, don't tell your wife what you're doing, you're just coming to the senator's house, and I met him at the door, and I said, look, I've got the Pentagon Papers. You come in, you can't leave until I leave. But I won't think ill of you if you don't come in, because there's risk that we don't know anything about. And so everyone to the person said, hey, Senator, let me have it. So about 4 or 5 people for 2 days were sleeping on the living room floor, and we would go through the papers. The style that I used in going through it, I was reading my little portion of it, the first part of it, which is the most historic and most interesting part. But the others I said, whenever you come across a name, come and show me the name. I would then read around the context and make a judgment, is that this should be excised or not. And when we exercised, we didn't just take a pencil, we took scissors and cut it out, so there'd be no misunderstandings. Now, I've got to bring the papers from my home to the Capitol. And so I buy 2 flight bags. You know those old flight bags without wheels? I buy 2 of those to honor the papers. And so I spend the money, pack them up with 2 bags like that, and so I'm going to take them to the Capitol. But now I'm concerned. So I call the Vietnam Veterans of America, and I say, look, I've got a problem. I need somebody to guard my office. And what I want the most disabled veterans you can find. Well, and lo and behold, I trudge in, and I wouldn't let my staff touch the paper. So I trudge in with my 2 big bags, heavy, and of course staff is walking with me, and the cops there looking, why the hell's the senator carrying the bags and the staff is not carrying his bags? So we walk down to the end of the hall, and there are about 6, 7 soldiers in uniform, you know it, ponytails, badges all over, all in wheelchairs. And they could do wheelies, and all they could do, they didn't know what I had. All they said, go get him, Senator, go get him. I'm just about to cry with the commitment of these human beings, and they guarded the office. No, but they would have thrown their bodies at anybody that tried to break in. I had the papers. I go to the floor of the Senate. Now, I had made a deal with Alan Cran. I wanted to read it in the filibuster. Now, I had a little bit of ego trip going on here. I wanted to break Strom Thurmond's record in filibustering. So... And the draft was going to expire at the end of the month. So I wanted to get 2 days, about almost close to 48 hours, and break his record. Now, how are you going to do that? Most people don't know when Huey Long and those guys used to debate, what they do is they're drinking a lot of water, they pee right on the floor, right on the Senate floor. They make no mistake about it. But I'm a little more cultured than that. And so what I do is I rig myself up. I go to the doctor's office. I tell him what's going on, tell him when I got filibuster. And so he rigs me up with the colostomy bag with little holes down to my ankle. And my administrative assistant's job is going to bleed the colostomy bag. Then it gets better than that. We now go to, I gotta get somebody in the chair, because you can't control the floor if you don't control the chair. So I go to Alan Cranston, my closest friend. I say, Alan, I need help. Well, what do you need, Mike? I got the Pentagon Papers. Oh my God, Mike, you need more than help. You got problems. So he says, I said, Alan, you don't have to do anything to risk. You don't have to touch the papers. You just get in the chair. By 5 o'clock, we'll turn around, and you just stay in that chair as long as I'm filibustering. And that was our plan. And so I said, now go down to the doctor's office and get a colostomy bag. He does that, and of course, I had a rubber mat. It was very interesting to go into the dynamics of that. So lo and behold, I come to the floor of the Senate. I'm trudging in with these papers. I put them next to my desk, and I was a freshman, so I was way on the side. And so Muskie had come up to me for some committee. We were on the same committee. He's talking to me. He looks down at these 2 black bags. He says, Mike, are those the Pentagon Papers? And I look up at him with a blank stare. It was just a joke on his part, but I'm looking at him, my God. So lo and behold, I'm a nice guy, so what I want to do, I know I'm going to be talking for a couple days, so I want to tell the staff of the Senate that, hey, you better call your wife because you're not getting out here shortly. And so what I do is I lay on a quorum call. Now, if you're familiar with the procedures in the Senate, a quorum call, they have to now start calling the roll. And there was only one other senator in the chamber. That was Griffin. The Democrats had gone to a banquet. The Republicans had gone home. And so there's two senators in the chamber. So I lay on a quorum call. Griffin walks up to me, and he says, Mike, what are you going to do? I says, well, I'm just continuing my filibuster on the draft. But I had always done that because Mansfield had set up a 2-track. Mind you, I filibustered for 5 months. It could only happen because Mansfield set it up without anybody seeing his velvet hand. And so I says, well, he says, but wait, what are you doing at night? I said, well, the draft's about to expire, and I just want to really make a big show. He goes back to his desk, and he's thinking. Then, of course, I wait 30 minutes to let the staff notify that they're going to be there a good part of the evening. And lo and behold, I make a unanimous consent to remove the quorum call. He objects. The minute he did that, I knew I had just been harpooned, and all I could think is in my mind, good men don't win. Good men don't win. I was so angry. He came up to me, and he says, well, Mike, what are you doing? And I started swearing at him, you cannot believe. Well, by that time, he knew something was really afoot. So he went to the Republican cloakroom, said, stay away from the Senate, telling all the Republicans, I'm sending my troops to go out there and get the Democrats to come back from the banquet. Well, that goes on for till about 9:30, 10 o'clock, and we could not get a quorum. I'm stuck. Rothstein comes up to me and he says, Senator, we're stuck. There's nothing we can do here. So I grabbed it, and he says, but our attorneys think they got a plan B. So we grabbed the bags, trudged back to the office again. By this time, the Vietnam vets are out there. They know there's something really serious afoot because there's a lot of media following us. And so I go in and sit down, what's our plan? Well, Senator, it's interesting. There's not much hope, but we do have one precedent that we could follow. And that's the precedent, believe it or not, the House Un-American Activities Committee, for those of you who know what that means. He says what they were doing is they would go around the country and they would immediately call a hearing so that they could grab somebody, pull them up, swear them in, and get them to talk. He says, with that precedent, what you could do, and now mind you, I'm a freshman, you're chairman of a committee, a subcommittee. And of course, that committee was the Buildings and Grounds Committee. So lo and behold, they say, what you could do is you could convene a hearing of this committee, and you'd be still within the umbrage of the Senate. And so I said, fine, let's do that. But what we've got to do is we've got to have somebody testify. So we type up the notice that I'm chairman, I'm calling a hearing, slip it under the doors of all these senators who are not there, that I'm notifying them of the hearing, so that that's covered legally. And then the peace group calls up a Congressman Dow from Upper New York. He doesn't know what it's about. All they tell him on the telephone, Senator Gravel needs you to come and testify at a very important hearing. He gets dressed, he was an elderly fellow, gets dressed, comes down, and we convene. By this time, we're upstairs in one of the Senate chambers, committee room, and the whole phalanx of the media, and then Congressman Dodd comes up, and I'm sitting there with my 2 black bags, and my staff assistant, and the congressman, and I gavelled the meeting to order. Congressman, can I help you? Now, I understand you want to testify. He says, yes, I'd like to get a federal building in my district. And I say, Congressman, let me interrupt you right there. I know you need a federal building in your district, and I'd love to give you a federal building in your district. But I got to tell you, our government's broke. We don't have any money to give you a federal building. And let me tell you why we're broke. Because we're squandering all this money in Southeast Asia. And let me tell you how we got into Southeast Asia. And I haul out the papers, put them on the table, and I'm reading. Okay. It gets better than that. I read for an hour. Now, here again, I'm dyslexic. There's no way on God's green earth I'm going to read it, but I'm reading it. Now, keep in mind, I hadn't slept for about 3 or 4 days, and so I'm reading, and I break out sobbing. It's about 12 o'clock at night, and I am sobbing, and I can't get control of myself. Here's what was going through my head. A journalist, one of the networks next morning, oh, this was a bizarre occurrence the night before. You know, Gravel was very bizarre. He cried. And so what I was sobbing over, I had been to Walter Reed a month or more before to walk around, and I couldn't take it. I couldn't take it emotionally to look at the wounded. And so I can handle macro problems, but not micro. And so lo and behold, I kept saying to myself, my God, I love my country. My country is committing immoral acts. We're killing human beings. There's no reason for it. And I'm sobbing. And of course, as a dyslexic, I'm reading rote. You know, I can follow the words in front of me. So Rothstein comes up to me. He says, in the understatement here, he says, Senator, I think you've lost it. And I'll keep sobbing. He says, and then he goes back, and I try to get a hold of myself, and I can't. And so he comes back. He says, Senator, why don't you put it in the record? And then I sobered up immediately and said, oh, yes, I got power. I'm the chairman of this committee. So I move and ask unanimous consent to put all these papers that I was going to read at the record, to put them in the record automatically. Bang, they're in the record. That's how it officially got into the record of the United States of America. And obviously the media, by that point, they're out there going, really? So I put the papers back in. We're trudging back to my office. The media is following us. We want the papers. We want the papers. So we cut a deal with them. Look, we got to copy the papers because we want to hang on to a set. And as we copy them, we'll turn them to you. You set up a pool, and then you go copy them and distribute them to the world. That's what happened all night long. And that's what made the Supreme Court decision moot, which was at 11 or 12 o'clock o'clock that very day. And what they did is they said you could not put on prior restraint, but what you could do is if you published, you'd be at risk. And that's what happened. Those that had published took the risks, but they weren't prepared to take the risks after that. We scoured the country, and this is where the meeting comes in with Beacon. We scoured the country, could not find one major or minor or anybody that would touch the Pentagon Papers. We had some inkling that maybe MIT Press would. So with my staff, Fishman and the one other attorney, we go to Boston. Whoever was handling it, and I don't recall at the time, he said, "Senator, I got bad news for you. MIT Press won't touch it with a 10-foot pole." And then I'm just crestfallen, like we're going to check how to get back to Washington. He said, "But I got some good news for you. Beacon Press has got the money, and they will publish it." And Gobin Stair and Bob West are downtown in Boston waiting for you if you want to come down and make the deal with them. And I said, let's go. And we had a press conference shortly thereafter, and that's when we announced that we were going to do it. I was a Unitarian even before all this happened in Alaska. But I can't tell you what I feel for the Beacon Press, for the Unitarians, and for Dan Ellsberg. Dan quoted and likes to say that when I went into service, I was going in to be a spy, but I wasn't getting any action, so I went in to be a combat infantry platoon leader. And on the patch on my shoulder said, "Follow me." Well, when I saw Dan do what he did, all I could think of, here's a guy that's walking up the hill, taking his life in his own hands, and the least I could do is follow Dan Ellsberg.